We're going to finish up some information that you need for your research paper. So right now we've written the 4 major sections. You've written the method section, you've written the results section, you've written the discussion section, the introduction section you're going to write on your own. That'll be handed in with your final research paper. So now we just got to cross all the I's and dot all the T's and make sure that we have all the pieces of it. So we're going to discuss citations, make sure we're very clear, especially for the introduction section, on when to cite, who to cite, how to cite. We're going to talk about putting it all together, including the list of articles that you have. We're going to remind you of the final stipulations, and then just information on how to submit that final paper. And then once we're done with that, we're going to get into generalization, and we're specifically going to look at replications, and we'll see how far we get before the end of class today. All right, so citations. So citations in a research paper, this is where you give credit for somebody else's idea. So you present somebody else's idea in your paper. You're 100% free to present somebody else's idea in your paper. However, you need to cite that particular individual. You need to give credit to that particular paper. So we mentioned before about citations and about the function of citations. We used them to literally find the Roediger and McDermott paper in the library assignment. So in terms of citations, now it's important to know what it is that you need to cite, because you are now writing the introduction, which will be the most heavily cited section of your paper. So we're going to take a look at what to cite and when to cite and how often to cite. And citations are a little bit easier to explain when you do the opposite. So instead of telling you exactly when to cite, I'll start with when you don't have to cite. So what is something that you will write in your paper, but you do not have to have a citation that goes with it? So the things that you don't need to cite, first and foremost, common knowledge. So anything that is just commonly known, anything that is just common knowledge, you don't actually need to provide a citation for that. So if you are trying to give an example of false memories, and you say something like, everybody in America has been told about Martin Luther King and his "I Have a Dream" speech, right? That's common knowledge. That's not something where you will have to go to a source and reference and provide a citation to back up the idea that Martin Luther King made a speech known as "I Have a Dream." That's common knowledge. That's not something that you need to cite. Kind of very basic definitions might also fall under that definition. So if you say something like, memory is the ability to learn information and then bring it back later on, that's pretty common knowledge. You don't necessarily need a citation for that. You don't need to dig out your general psychology textbook and find, a citation or the page where that knowledge was given. So common knowledge, you don't need to cite. The other big one is you don't need to cite your own ideas. So some of this research paper will be your own ideas, even in the introduction section. So, if you are talking about the implications of the results, for example, in the conclusions, you're saying, these results mean this. They mean that this is how psychology works. That's your own idea. You don't need to provide a citation for that. So if you talk about your own experiences, you don't need a citation for that. If you talk about your own observations, if you talk about things like, I have noticed in our world today that oftentimes people do this. If that's your own observation, you don't need to cite it either. Your own memories, your own thoughts, your own opinions, your own conclusions, anything that you come up with on your own that is your own work, you don't need a citation for. So for example, your hypotheses, you don't need to cite those. Your implications in the discussion section, when you say, based on our results, this is what should be happening in the education system, you don't need a citation for that either. Those are your own thoughts. So that's what you don't need to cite. So what you need to cite is basically everything else. you need to cite things that are not commonly known, that would not be known by somebody outside of this psychology area. So what reconstructed memory is, that's not common knowledge. What group cognition is, that's not common knowledge. So when you define reconstructed memory in the introduction section, you need to cite Roediger and McDermott or somebody else that has defined reconstructed memory. When you describe what group cognition is, that's not your own idea, you did not come up with it, you need to cite Weldon and Bellinger or maybe one of your other articles for what that is. So again, if it's not common knowledge and it's not your own ideas, that statement, that sentence, gets a citation. All right, so that's what to cite and what not to cite. In terms of when to cite, you want to cite any sentence in which you use those words, those thoughts, those facts, those opinions, those non-common knowledge that came from other people's work. You want to basically do that in any sentence that you write where you use that source. And because of this, in a paragraph, every sentence might contain a citation. It's quite possible that you will say something like, reconstructed memory is this, and cite Roediger and McDermott. On the other hand, group cognition is this, and cite Weldon and Bellinger. And then cite something like, reconstructed memory has been shown to interact with group memory in studies done by, and then cite that third person. It could be that every sentence in a paragraph gets cited simply because every sentence in the paragraph is not common knowledge, every sentence in the paragraph is not your own idea, therefore you need to cite it. So be sure, again, that anytime you write a sentence that is somebody else's idea and is not common knowledge, that you provide a citation for that sentence. And then the other time to cite is as early as possible. So what this means is basically as soon as you make the statement, you want to cite that information. So if you have, for example, this oftentimes occurs in run-on sentences. If you write a sentence that says something like, reconstructed memory is the process of remaking a memory every single time that you remember it, and this is something that oftentimes happens in various forms whenever we do a memory task. That's a big, huge, long sentence. Roediger and McDermott should come at the point where you're done talking about reconstructed memory. Roediger and McDermott should come at the point where you say, reconstructed memory is when you remake a memory every single time that you remember it. Roediger and McDermott, 1995. And this implication has, effects on this and this and this. And if that's not your idea, cite another individual or cite that source again. So it should come as early as possible. If you find that you're citing the same person, though, multiple times in a sentence, then you can put it at the end of a sentence. So if your second citation was Roediger and McDermott, and there's two of them in the same sentence, feel free to just put that Roediger and McDermott at the end of a sentence. But if you have a run-on sentence, make sure, or not a run-on, but like a compound sentence, put it in the middle, the citation in the middle if that's where it belongs. So as soon as you use that fact, try to put the citation there. And unless it's really getting jumbled up because of that, that's, for the ease of the reader, you might want to save it to the end. But basically, as soon as you introduce an idea, that's when the citation should occur. All right, so that's when to cite. And then finally, how often to cite. This is kind of implied in the when to cite. What you want to cite whenever you use a source, and you want to do that for every citation. You want to have a citation for every piece of borrowed information, for every piece of information that you're actually using. So again, it doesn't matter if you've cited Roediger and McDermott 5 times in the introduction already. If you use another piece of information from that source, you got to cite that new piece of information. If you use the same information, again, later on in the introduction, you still have to cite that information again. So if you say something like, Roediger and McDermott defined reconstructed memory as the process of remaking memory every single time you recollect it, you would cite Roediger and McDermott right there. Let's say that a page later, you're trying to be friendly to your reader, and you say something like, as mentioned before, reconstructive memory is the process where we remake information whenever we recall it, cite Roediger and McDermott again, because it's not your idea. So you need a citation for every piece of borrowed information. So do not be surprised if your introduction section is heavily cited, because again, you're presenting the background of to your reader of reconstructive memory and group memory, most of which you did not come up with on your own. Your hypotheses probably will not have any citations. Your intro example of false memories in a group setting to kind of cue the reader to what's coming in the future will not have any citations. Everything else might have a citation for every single sentence. And again, it just matters whether you borrow that or not. So if you, for example, define reconstructive memory, cite that. If you then come up with an example to illustrate it, you don't need to cite that if it's your example. If you paraphrase it in another way, you don't need to cite that because it's just a paraphrase of what you just said. But in my experience, students writing their first paper tend to undercite rather than oversight in their paper. So I would recommend that if you are on the borderline of should I cite this or should I not cite this, the probable outcome is that you should cite it. So I'd rather see an oversighted paper than an undercited paper. All right, and then other information where that can help you out with your citations. It's in the research paper resources in Canvas, and it's citing sources, what, when, and how often to cite writing with confidence. So that's a PDF that I uploaded there. So it could shed a little bit more light on exactly when to cite and what to cite. But definitely, again, if it's not common knowledge and it's not your own ideas, find out where you got that information and provide that citation for it. All right, any questions on citations? All right, putting it all together. So when we're finally compiling this entire research paper into one Word document, when we're finally getting it all together, what we're going to have is we're going to have the 4 major sections that you wrote. We're going to have an abstract as a summary introduction, and then we're going to have some additional parts of it. But the one thing to remember is your research article, it is a story. Make sure that it's a good one. So we have been putting this story together kind of piece by piece by piece. And one thing that oftentimes happens is that people write something in the discussion section, and then by the time they start writing the introduction, they have forgotten what they wrote in the discussion section, and they'll write an introduction section that doesn't link up with the discussion section. Make sure that your entire story has a through line to it. Make sure that it's all connected, it all flows well, that by the time you get to the end of the introduction, you're ready for the method section. By the time you get done with the method section, you're ready for the results. By the time you get done with the results section, you're ready for the discussion, that the same terms are used consistently throughout. So if we decided on terms for the results section, and it's different from what you used in the method section, make sure you go back and switch those up so that, again, your research article is this good full story. In terms of everything that's going to go in there, this is a list. That's your checklist for every section that you're going to need in your research paper. So you are going to need a title page, check. You're going to need an abstract, check. You're writing your introduction, method section you wrote, results you wrote, discussion you wrote. Make sure that you use your peer reviews for those 3 sections to improve them. References you're going to need, and then tables and figures you're going to need, and we're going to talk about those little extra pieces today. We'll start off with the title page. For more information on the title page, you can check out organization of the report in your textbook. If it's formatted the same way mine is, that'll start on page 319, but that is the heading that'll give you information about your title page. But the biggest, and you can also find information on the title. The biggest sort of tip that I can give you for your title page is make it not look like a published title page. So this title page is completely wrong for your manuscript submission. Remember that we're doing manuscript submission, and I'll show you in a second a resource that you can use to make sure that your title page looks correct. In terms of the actual title that you come up with, one tip that you can do, you don't have to, but this is for your psychology future, you can see you don't have to do it because I didn't even do it here on this article that I published. One tip that you can do is you can always try to mention the direction of the results in your title. So that's always very nice to the reader. That's always a good way to communicate what your research paper is going to be about. So for example here, rather than having, the effects of group cognition on memory, right? That's not a bad title. It's what our research paper is about. It's about group cognition. It's about memory. You'll see in the readings here that you do want to mention the factors that you're testing. So we're testing group cognition, we're testing memory. Ergo, we should try to mention group cognition and memory in our title. But a better title would be something like groups more confident for false memories than singles, right? That lets you know we're dealing with false memories, we're dealing with groups, but it also tells you the direction of one of our results. And that's just a lot more reader-friendly. On the title page, you are going to need your authors and your affiliation. So the note for this is that you are the first author. So on this research paper that you are handing in, you're the first author. You have by far done the most work on the write-up of this paper. So you deserve first authorship. You've earned first authorship. I am going to be the second author on all of your papers, because I have made a substantial contribution to this research paper. I designed the stimuli, I ran the results. So I have done enough to become an author on this, but I have not done enough to be first author. So you're gonna be first author, I'm gonna be second author. Make sure that you have that on your title pages. And then Indiana University South Bend is gonna be the affiliation. So it's very typical, you have your authors, and then underneath it, you have where was this work done, who were they affiliated with when they did this work. So you did this work as students here at IUSB, you're affiliated with Indiana University South Bend. Author's note for your paper, we don't need that. So typically an author's note will be how to get in contact with the author, corresponding information like email address and all that kind of stuff. We don't need that. We're not actually submitting this to a journal. So the author's note, we're not actually going to require that. Running head and page number, that is required. So the running head is a shortened title that is in the top right of, it's in the top left of your page. Your page number is in the top right of your page, I believe. You might want to double check on the page number where it goes. I believe it's top right. But your running head and page number, you'll have to include those. And these are a bit of a holdover, I personally think, for the days when these used to be submitted in paper form. So I remember hearing told of the old stories when if you were submitting to a journal, you would go to the post office and you would mail off 3 copies of your manuscript to the journal and hope that they would accept it, and they would mail you back acceptance or rejection letters, and it was not a good process. The only thing I can imagine the running head is for those journal editors that were carrying around these mounds and mounds of journal articles that were submitted, and they tripped and they fell and papers went everywhere, and the running head was a nice way to organize what pages go with which report. That's the only thing I can imagine that it's for, but it's that shortened title in the upper corner. And the note for this, if you don't know how to insert headers into Word, you are going to be spending a little bit of time on YouTube doing a little bit of a tutorial. Use the insert header function in Word to insert these 2 headers, the running head and the page number, because otherwise the formatting on your paper, number one, becomes very messy. And number two, becomes very sensitive to any changes that you make. If you insert the header, if you use insert header and you have to rewrite a paragraph, everything else shifts, it all looks great. If you're trying to do it manually, you rewrite one thing, everything shifts, it looks horrible. So this is my kind of tip. Use that insert header feature in Word. If you don't know how to use it, there's tons of tutorials and resources online where you can watch how to do that. So make sure that you do that for your running head and your page number. All right, so in terms of organization of the report, for your title page, the APA requirements, again, that starts on page 319 where you can get some information for that. This is what I wanted to mention. By far, your best friend during this time of putting everything together in a final form is going to be this one experiment sample APA paper that you can find in your textbook. So we introduced this one earlier on in the semester, but this is a nice example of what I mean. So when you read the APA requirements for the title page, they will say things like, it needs to have the running head. Running head must be labeled running head. It'll say things like your title will be, your title will be first, your names will be underneath it, your affiliation will be underneath that, and that information must be centered in the upper half of the page. All of that is a description. It's difficult sometimes to decode that, but a visual like this, much easier to decode. So when you're putting the final touches on your paper, after you've read, this is what the APA requirements are for each section, make sure you go to this one experiment sample paper and just compare what you've done to what they've done. So notice, for example, no weird fonts. It's still Times New Roman 12 point. I don't want to see bold. I don't want to see bigger lettering. I want to see exactly the way that it looks here. Notice that in all the names, there's no titles. There's no doctor or anything like that. I'm very proud of getting my PhD. I actually got it from the University of Toronto. It's just a coincidence. I'm very proud of it, but it does not belong on a title page in a report. The and here, notice it's and, not ampersand, right? So it's all these little things that really can come out when you take a look at this one sample paper. So I would just kind of have your paper, side by side, and take a look at yours, take a look at this, take a look at yours, take a look at this. And if anything doesn't match up, it's very easy visually to see that. So if your running head is not in capitals, change it into capitals. If you don't have page 1 on your title page, put page 1 on your title page. These are all things that are outlined in those sections in your textbook about what to put into a title page. But again, it's way easier to see in these one experiment sample papers. So that's the title page. As you can see, the title page is its own page. The only thing on the title page is the title, your names, the affiliation, running head, and the page number. And then on the very next page, you have your abstract. So your abstract, again, for more details, organization of the report, but your abstract is a summary of the entire research report. It is like a movie trailer that gives away the entire movie. So if you've ever watched a movie trailer, and at the end of the movie trailer, you're like, well, they gave away the biggest spoilers and they sort of ruined the ending. I guess I don't need to see the movie. That's exactly what you don't want in a movie trailer. That's exactly what you want in an abstract. So it's a complete summary of the entire research report. That's very challenging to do sometimes because you literally have 12 pages and this is asking you to summarize it in one paragraph. So the easiest way that I found to do this is to limit yourself to one minimum, 2 maximum sentences that summarize each section. So go to your introduction section and ask yourself, if you had to say in one sentence what your introduction is about, what would that be? You can stretch it to 2 sentences. If you absolutely can't do it, you can stretch it to 2 sentences. So 1 sentence for what your introduction is about, 1 sentence for your method, 1 to 2 sentences. So again, ask yourself, in general, what did we do in the method? How can I summarize this in just 1 sentence? We split subjects into 3 groups, singles, pairs, or triples, and we asked them to memorize words in a list, right? Boil it down to 1 sentence. Results section. You don't have to summarize the entire results section, right? We got a lot that was in our results section. Pick out the main idea of the results section, the main point, the main sort of interesting finding. And then finally, for your discussion, 1 synopsis of the discussion. What theories were supported? What do our results mean? You got 1 sentence for each. Your abstract, and I will count this, there are points for this, will be a minimum of 4 sentences, a maximum of 8. It'll probably be somewhere in between. So just to kind of show you this in practice, this is a method that was passed down to me from my supervisor. So we take a look at this abstract that we wrote, and it goes, the central problem for psychology is vision's reaction to perspective. That's 1 sentence that summarizes our entire introduction. Our introduction goes into picture viewing, goes into the Renaissance, goes into perspective projection, but the basic idea is that a central problem for psychology is vision's reaction to perspective. So that is 1 sentence for the intro. In the present studies, observers looked at perspective pictures projected by square tiles on a ground plane. Sentence number 1. They judged the dimensions while positioned at the correct distance, farther or nearer. 2 sentences, method is summarized. And we start the results. In some pictures, many tiles appeared too short to be square, many too long, and many just right. The judgments were strong, so that's 1 sentence. The judgments were strongly affected by viewing from the wrong distance, eye height, and object orientation. 2 sentences. Results are done. Finally, the authors propose a 2-factor angles and ratios together art theory with the following factors: the ratio of the visual angles of the tile's size, blah, 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 all the way down through the central vanishing point. 1 final sentence for the discussion section. 6 sentences in all, we have our abstract done. So stick to this procedure. It's a great way to make sure that you cover everything without going into too much detail and having a way too long abstract. Those are horrible, horrible things to encounter. All right, in terms of organization of the research report abstract, check out what your textbook has to say in terms of organizing it, where it goes. My big tip for the abstract, first off, it starts on its own page. It gets its own page. There's an entire page dedicated to the abstract. Seems like a bit of a waste of paper to me, but thankfully we're electronic now, so we don't got to worry about that. Abstract by itself on the page. This is just a little pet peeve of mine, so I'm going to mention it here. Not indented. It's really the only time that a paragraph is not indented in APA style. And it is the second thing I'm going to see in your research report. And I will be a little heartbroken if I see that indentation. All right, so make sure that you're not indenting it. It's literally a signal. I see no reason to not indent it other than signaling to the people that are reading that, yes, I know APA style. Look at this. I did not indent my abstract. So I think I've done it in 1 semester where I had 100% no indentation. So I want to do it again. I want to have that feeling one more time. So don't indent the abstract. And then again, make it look like this one, right? So notice, abstract is titled abstract. We have a running head, but notice, running head is gone. Okay, there's a way to do that in Word, where you can have the first page different than the second pages. Take a look on YouTube, tons of tutorials on that. Page number is still there, all by itself. So make sure that you have that as well. And then, so make sure that you have your abstract done and have that information there. All right, references. References, once you're done, let me back up for a second. Once you're done with your abstract, so you have your title page. Title page is all alone. Page number 2, abstract. Abstract by itself. Page number 3 is where your introduction begins. Once your introduction ends, if it's in the middle of a page, your method section starts right after your introduction. Once your method section ends, your results page starts right after that. So they don't start on new pages unless just by chance they've started on a new page. So your introduction, method, results, and discussion section, that's like one big continuous piece of writing that occurs. Once you're done your discussion section, you start a new page, and that new page is where you have your references. So it's going to be right after your introduction section, but starting on a new page. So again, a lot of the information about how to organize that, the fact that it starts on a new page, you have that resource in your textbook. What I want to point out is this very, very important rule that everything in your reference section has to be cited somewhere in your text. So in your research paper, you're going to have citations. If something is in your reference section, it has to be cited somewhere in your research paper. And if something is cited in your research paper, it has to go into your reference section. Your reference section and your citations will have a one-to-one correspondence. If it's cited, it's in the reference section. If it's in the reference section, it's cited. And I'm going to emphasize that because reference section is a little bit different than what you might be used to in English writing, which is the bibliography. And a bibliography is a list of sources that you used for your paper, as well as additional sources that might be of interest to the reader. That's typically what's in a bibliography. A reference section is just sources that you used in your paper. Nothing else, no other additional information. If you found, for example, were reading Roediger and McDermott, and you were just massively confused, and you thought to yourself, you know what, before I try to tackle this, let me go back to my general psychology textbook, my intro psychology textbook. I'm going to review that section on memory, and hopefully that'll help me understand Roediger and McDermott. Let's say that you go back to the chapter on memory, you read the chapter on memory, and it's the only reason that Roediger and McDermott made any sense to you whatsoever. You might be highly indebted to that chapter on memory, but unless you specifically used information from that chapter and cited that information in your paper, you do not include that chapter in your reference section. So it's only stuff that gets cited that go into the reference, and if it's in the references, I better find it cited somewhere in your paper. All right, so in terms of constructing the reference section, take a look at organizing your report again. It has information on the references, starts on a new page, for example. And then also citing and referencing sources will have it will have information on reference list style. So the major thing that we're going to be looking at for your references is basically, number one, are they in APA style? Number two, is your reference paper organized correctly? And the major thing we're going to be looking for that is, are your references in the correct order? So references in a APA paper, they are listed alphabetically by first author. While we're on that note, you never change the order of authors. First author is like a place of honor. It's the person that has done the most for this paper. They've earned first authorship. You do not get to move them to second author when you're reporting when you're citing the information or doing references. So your author order does not change. Don't mess with the author order. And then when you list your references, when you list the 6 references that you have, they're listed in order of that first author. So you can see here it goes Adams, and then it goes Fedorov, and then it goes Jansen, and then it goes Herman, and then it goes Knight. So it's listed in order of your first author. If your first author is the same, if there's a tie, so here we got Fedorov and we got Fedorov, then you go to your second author. If your second author is a tie, this is a good example. If your second author is a tie, then you go to your third author. If your third author is a tie, you go to your fourth and your fifth until you run out of authors. If you run out of authors and it's still a tie, you go to the date. And if the date is still a tie, then you got to look that one up because there's a rule, but I can't remember it offhand. But that's how you do it. So we see here Herman. All right, we go to Pahlavi and Pahlavi. Okay, we go to nothing versus silver. Nothing comes before silver. So Herman and Pahlavi 1984 comes before Herman, Pahlavi, and silver 1979. So make sure that you have them in the correct order, and then also check your textbook, and you can also check the online resources such as OWL Purdue for how to format a reference. If you remember in our library visit, there is that tool in EBSCOhost that will format a reference for you in APA style. It's been my experience that that'll get you there about 95% of the way, about 90% of the time. So it's up to you. You can use that as a tool. You can basically copy and paste it into your Word document, but it's up to you to make sure that you do a final check to make sure that it's formatted correctly. So big things, the two sort of biggest things, three sort of biggest things. Number one, you need the correct journal title. So it might be listed as the JEXP of Gen 6, right? That's not what you write. You write the Journal of Experimental Psychology General. So make sure that you have the full correct title. That's one of the first kind of common errors that oftentimes occurs. Second thing is the title of your journal is in italics. That's an APA style. Make sure that you have that in italics for your journal titles. Your title of your article, not in italics, just written in regular font. But this is the important one. It's in paragraph form. So it is starting with a capital and then nothing else is capitalized. So a boundary model for the regulation of eating, nothing else in here is capitalized. And there are some exceptions to that rule. So for example, if there's a colon, then the next word is capitalized. If there's a name, I don't know if we have an example of that. If there's a name, that's capitalized as well. But it's basically in paragraph form. Those are the big things. So for your references, again, double check. There's a bunch of rules. If it's a book versus a journal, there's different rules. Ampersand is used for multiple authors. So again, just kind of go through these lists of APA style things, find out what your reference, what applies to your reference, and make sure that those are formatted correctly. So those are the references in your reference list. In terms of citations, that's the flip side of that. Once again, make sure that everything you reference is cited, everything that you've cited is referenced. And for your citations, you will find a list on how to, you will find the APA guide on how to cite. You can check it out in citation style right there. The most important thing for citations is, first off, how many authors are there? So there are rules for one author papers, there are rules for two author papers, there are rules for 3 to 5 author papers, and there are rules for 6 or more author papers. They're different. So take a look at the authors, the number of authors in each of your papers. I know for a fact you have one that's a single author, that's Deese. You got 2 that are 2 authors, Roediger and McDermott, Weldon and Bellinger. So take a look at how many authors your papers have and find the correct citation form for that number of authors. The second thing is it an in-text citation or a parenthetical citation? An in-text citation is when you mention the names of the author in the actual text, and your citation is the year that they published that. So if you write something like, Roediger and McDermott studied reconstructive memory in 1995, Roediger and McDermott are part of the text, they're part of the narrative, that's an in-text citation. If you say something along the lines of, psychology has studied reconstructive memory, and then in parentheses, Roediger and McDermott, 1995 is your reference, that's a parenthetical citation. There are different rules for in-text versus parenthetical. And then the last one that I'll draw your attention to is that if you are citing multiple times in the same paragraph and they are in-text citations, you only cite the year the first time in a paragraph, and then subsequent times in that paragraph, you don't cite the year. Those are kind of, put those on your radar. But again, check the citation style, find out the number of authors that you have. Is it in text or is it parenthetical? And then do the citation that matches up with that. All right, so that's citations. So the last sort of thing that we need is your tables and figures. So for the results section, you had either 2 figures or 2 tables. So these weren't required for the draft, but for the final research paper, we now need figures or tables. We pointed to them in the results section. So in the results section, you might remember that we wrote things like, oh, see figure 1. There was a main effect for item type. In general, correct items had a higher % recall than critical items, see figure 1. So it's either going to be a figure or table. That's depending completely upon you, whatever your preference is. But those are going to be the final 2 things in your research paper. So they will get, they'll be at the end of the Word document. They each get a separate page. So if you're doing 2 figures, figure 1 is on one page, figure 2 is all alone on that second page. If you're doing 2 tables, table 1 is on the first page, table 2 is all alone on that second page. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that you need to use Arial font. That goes for figures for sure. I believe it also goes for tables, but double check that in your APA textbook resource. This is definitely for figures. Your figures must be grayscale. So much of psychology still has print journals. Printing in color is expensive, and journals will charge you to print in color if needed. So I remember when I was doing color research and we would publish journal articles, we would have a check ready to go for, I believe one of them went to about $1,800 to pay for the color printing that we needed because we needed color figures. We were doing color research. So if you want to get technical about this, you could either cut me a check for $1,800 and submit it with your research paper, or probably make sure that your figures are grayscale. So make them grayscale. There's color figures. You can basically modify the figures that I showed you when we were going over the results to be grayscale, but make sure that they're grayscale, and importantly, make sure that they're legible in grayscale. So that goes to this. They have to be clear and easy to read. So no color figures without an $1,800 check. They must be clear and easy to read, and that's at half the width of the page. So you'll hand them in, they'll be full page figures, but make sure that the fonts are manipulated and large enough so that if they get shrunk down to half a page, which is typical for the publication format, you can still read them comfortably. So they'll still be clear and easy to read, and they need to be clear and easy to read in grayscale. So this is part of the challenge of making the figures. The ones that I provided to you in the PDF for the results section, as well as interspersed in the PowerPoint files as we discussed our results. If you just simply take those, put them into a Photoshop program, and just click on grayscale, what you'll find is that half of the bars will become dark gray, and the other bars will become slightly darker gray. And that is just not very legible. You will not be able to distinguish visually between those two. You want to make sure that it's clear and easy to read. Dark gray versus light gray, black versus white, striped versus polka dot, whatever it is, it has to be legible and easy to read in grayscale. So use those figures as a starting point. Feel free to either Photoshop those figures or create your own in Excel, whichever route you want to go down. You have the data in the results section to create those figures, and they have to be included in your final report. If you don't want to do figures, take that information and make a table. But you do need at least either figures or tables. In terms of APA formatting checklist, they have a checklist. In terms of APA style, they have a checklist for tables and figures in your textbook. Again, if it's formatted the way I have it, it starts on page IC. But again, you can just look for the APA formatting checklist, and it'll give you a nice sort of checklist to go down to make sure that your figures and/or your tables are correctly formatted. In terms of your figures, you only get 2 figures. So we had C figure 1, we had C figure 2. So your figures are going to be of the interaction and not of the main effects. So your figures are going to be the ones that show the effects of group size for both critical words and correct words. It'll basically be the graphs that have 6 bars on them. Critical and correct for singles, critical and correct for pairs, critical and correct for groups of 3. All right, and then in general, APA formatting, basically what we have done so far for all the sections. So everything carries forward for this final research report. Everything needs to be done correctly at this point. So we did the method section before introducing the rules for numbers in APA. Make sure that you go back to the method section and fix up any numbers that you might have been missing at that point. Make sure that you go back to the method section, fix up that one citation if you haven't done that already. So basically what we've ended up with in terms of the APA requirements, that goes for your entire research paper. All right, a few more things, and then I think we'll be able to introduce the idea of generalization and replication. So this is a recap just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So when I'm grading this paper, I will grade for content. And I'll take a look at what's the content in your abstract. What did you actually write in your abstract? Are you missing, for example, the introduction sentence for your abstract? What's in your introduction? Did you talk about reconstructed memory? Did you talk about group memory? Do you have a hypothesis? Your method section. Is the information required for the method section in there? Is the information for the results in there? Is the information for the discussion in there? And then just in general, is the information that needs to be in your research report there? That's going to be worth 50% of your grade. The other 50% is going to be APA style. And that means it's going to be about the formatting. Was the title page formatted correctly? Was the abstract formatted correctly? Were the tables and figures, citations, references, headings, page number, running head, were all of the things in these sections formatted correctly in APA style? And I bring this up here again because I want you to know that these are both equally important towards your grade. So this is about learning how to write a research paper in APA style. And it's been my experience that if students neglect one of these, surprisingly, they neglect the APA style. So I will see papers handed in that have no page number. I will see papers handed in that don't have a running head. I will see papers handed in that don't have their titles, their headings bolded and in the center. APA, formatting issues throughout the entire section. I will see papers that reference the title, cite the title of the article in addition to the names. We don't do that in APA. So this is just my sort of public service announcement. Give yourself time to work on the APA style. You could literally hand in garbage content, right? You could literally hand in a paper that says, what is reconstructed memory? I have no idea. I was sitting here not at all paying attention to anything that was ever done in this course. But I do remember you mentioning Roediger and McDermott, 1997. You could write your content and it could have nothing of what is needed. You could still get perfect on your APA style. All right, so that's just a dramatic example. Make sure that you set aside the time because this is the most straightforward aspects of it. This is more cognitively challenging, right? Using an ampersand or an and, it's pretty straightforward. This is the more difficult part, but just make sure that you set aside enough time for this because it is worth the same points towards your final grade on this research paper. All right, so other reminders. For your list of articles, make sure that you are using the articles that you found in your library assignment. So make sure that you're using the approved articles so you do not get to switch for this final research paper. So everybody's going to be using these. Everybody's going to be using Roediger and McDermott, and then that one additional article that you got approved in your library assignment. And then for group memory, everybody is going to have Weldon and Bellinger, plus 2 additional articles that you found in your, in your library assignment. All right, so make sure you got those articles in there. All 6 of them need to be cited. All 6 of them need to find their way into the reference section. If you're having a hard time getting one of them into your research paper, your guaranteed places where you can get them in is in your discussion section in the implications. So you can say, well, I couldn't find a place to put my article on group memory in social media. I couldn't find a place to put that. Oh, in my implications, I'll say, well, this kind of implies that in social media, this is going to be the effect of false memories, and then you can cite it in there when you discuss it. The other place is in future directions. So if you had a study on false memory in children with autism, and you couldn't find a place to put that into your research paper, just suggest, the next step in the research should be to take a look at autism to see if group memory actually is because of social interactions, because autistic children, they don't interact as much socially, so therefore, and you explain that. But it has to be in there somewhere. You have to cite them all. You have to reference them all. All right, footnotes, some final stipulations. Footnotes, you don't need them. If they're in there, take them out. There really isn't a need, so why make it more complicated? But definitely no quotes. So quotes are not allowed. They are allowed in APA style. You will see sections on how to quote in APA, but they're just not allowed for this assignment because in the past I've realized that some students use quotes so that 90% of it is quotes and only 10% of it is their own writing. And this is about learning how to paraphrase, how to restate things in your own words. So quotes are not allowed. So if you find yourself with a quote in your paper when you're proofreading your drafts, take them out. Rephrase it. Use those critical thinking skills because there are penalties, heavy penalties for using quotes. So please do not. Other final stipulations. If you haven't already, make sure that your certification test was submitted. So it's in, for everybody that has completed it, it's been graded, it's in Canvas, it's in your grade book. I will not grade your research paper until I get that. So if, I think there might be 1 or 2 students here that still have to get those in, so if you're watching at home, just make sure that you submit that. It'll be late, but I will not grade it unless I know that you understand what plagiarism is, so that you can, so that I know that your research paper is your own work. So make sure that you do that if you haven't already. And then make sure that you give your research paper an honest effort. I know it's a big project. I know it's a lot of work to put together. And I don't want to make anybody feel anxious about this, but there is a stipulation that you need to receive a grade of 50% or higher on your research paper to pass the course. So regardless of how you're doing in the course, this is a course about writing, and you need to do a 50% or greater on your research paper to pass the course. I have never had a paper where every section was written and every little part was included. A title page was included, abstract was included, there was a reference section that got less than this. This is a rule in there just to handle students who might think to themselves, well, maybe I won't write an introduction section, right? Because I'm gonna pass this course anyway, a C is good enough for me, so I'm not gonna finish my research paper. Here it is without an introduction section. You run the risk of not passing the entire course. But again, I've never seen somebody give an honest, complete attempt and not make it. So don't worry about it. If you have all your sections, you'll be fine. Just want to put that on everybody's radar. All right, the final document is going to be submitted, single Word document. So one big research paper that has everything in there. It'll be submitted to Turnitin as well as Canvas, so that's just a little backup redundancy. And then you will also submit your 3 peer review response summaries. So those Word documents are available on Canvas right now, so you can download them. And as you're making changes to your drafts, just make a note as you're going through your peer reviews and the feedback, just make a note of the changes that you've made in those, and those will be submitted to Canvas along with your research papers. All right, any questions on kind of any of those final stipulations of the research paper? All right, All right. That was a lot. So any final questions on the review paper or anything like that? All right.